Welcome to Live DAF, your online DAF Yomi Shir.
Shalom Aleichem, welcome back to today's DAF, Bava Kamma DAF Peches. We are holding 4 lines off the top of the Amud. Rabbi Yehuda says, however, when it comes to boishes, compensation for embarrassment, for shame, that doesn't pertain to an Eved Kanani who is a slave, who is not a Yiddish slave. So if one attacks an Eved Kanani, he will not pay boishes. Why? My time with Rabbi Yehuda, why is that so? Amakra, the pasuk pertaining to the boishes payat, uses the following words: Ki notzu anashim yachtav, ish va'achav. You have an ish va'achav, a Yid and his fellow Yid are having this confrontation, and then we have a discussion regarding boishes payat. So we learn that boishes only applies to a fellow Yid, one of your brethren, b'mishi yesh lo achva, only to a person with whom you have achva. Rashi says, im Yisrael she'ein bo b'kol. So basically, achva pertains to familial relations, to communal relations. A person who can intermarry with you. Yatsa eved she'ein lo achva, as opposed to an eved who cannot marry into the community. So according to Rabbi Yehuda, achva pertains to marriage and familial matters. So an eved, he's out of the picture. There's no boishes payat. V'Rabbanan, however, Rabbanan disagree. You pay boishes even for attacking an eved, although the pasuk mentions achiv. Achiv does not necessarily pertain to marriage-related, access. Rather, achiv hu b'mitzvahs, as long as you have something very strongly in common with the eved, just as you are obligated, just as you do mitzvahs. So achva here means somebody who, like you, is in the same boat. An eved also fulfills mitzvahs. Rashi says, which mitzvahs? Kol mitzvahs isha chayevas ba, eved chayev ba. We learn from Exer Shava, just like an isha is chayev in certain mitzvahs, right? The mitzvahs loisa asay and mitzvahs asay, which are not time related. Likewise, an eved is chayev in all those mitzvahs. So achva refers to that status. Achiv hu b'mitzvahs, and therefore there is boishes even for attacking an eved. So that's the Gemara. Elamiyata. Let's go back to Rabbi Yehuda. An eved is not regarded as your brother. Elamiyata Rabbi Yehuda. According to Rabbi Yehuda, Tue May eved. So you have, Edom who plotted against an eved Kanani. They tried to impose misas, tried to trigger the misa penalty from the bezdin. They presented a false story as though the eved is chayiv misa, and it turns out that they're zayumin, they're falsifiers, they're Edom zayumin. In which case, typically we turn things around and we apply that process to them. Wanted to kill him, they get killed, right? But according to Rabbi Yehuda, that whole process does not apply to an eved Kanani who is victimized by these Edom zayumin. We don't kill them. How come? We apply to the Edom zayumin just as they had plotted to inflict upon their brother, as opposed to an eved. Amar Rava, Amar Rav Sheshes. No, here it's different. Amakra, we have a special pasuk to include even the Edom zayumin in this case. Eradicate evil from within you, mikol makayim, including this type of situation as well. Elamiyat. Now, on the flip side, let's have a question according to the Rabban. The Rabban who say that even an eved can be labeled as one of your brethren. The Rabbanon yehi eved kashal malchus. So technically, we can appoint even an eved as our king. The pasuk says you need to have one of your brethren, mikerav achecha, which according to Rabbanon, an eved, fully qualifies for that title. So why can't we appoint an eved? Well, so the question was like this. The response was, according to you, ask the same question regarding convert. According to all shittas, He was born Jewish. Rashi says, we're speaking about a ger, meaning he's coming from non-Jewish parents, but he was born after his mother converted. That's the case. Even that type of case, you cannot appoint him as king, as per the Gemara in Nivamis. So the question is, why? Why is he not called? If an Eved is called a Chicha, right? So why can't we appoint an Eved, a ger, right? So even according to Rabbi Yehuda, right? Because he's called a Chicha. Says the Gemara Elamakra. Apparently, because there's a special pasuk that limits our options when it comes to appointing a king. He has to have, full-fledged, Jewish stock, Jewish, lineage. The king that you will appoint has to be from within your brethren, from the midst of your brethren, the best. From the best in your community, meaning the one with full Jewish stock. So according to all shittas, a ger, notwithstanding his high status and his, personally, perhaps, he's just as good, but there's a special stipulation. When it comes to appointing a king, we have special qualification. It has to be somebody who is, naturally born Yid, and that answers this question. The Gemara asks the Gemara, according to Rabbanan, who consider even an Eved as one of yours, as a Chicha, what about allowing an Eved Kanani, we're speaking, to get up and offer testimony in a Bezdin? We should accept his testimony. Why? We have a lashon achiv by an eid, and an Eved should qualify. And we all know that it's not so. We don't accept eidus from a Eved. Amar Ula says Ula eidus lemotzes amrs. No, you can't suggest. You cannot suggest that an Eved is kosher for eidus for a different reason, unrelated to achecha or to achiv. How? Asyo eidus b'kavachayim meisha. When it comes to eidus, we can derive by way of a kavachemer from a woman who cannot offer testimony in the bezdin. Likewise, certainly an Eved. How? Uma ish shiru'u lava b'kol psula le'edus. Even a regular Jewish woman who's ru'u lava b'kol, she can fully access the Jewish community in terms of marriage. Still, she's not qualified to offer edus. And Rashi brings the Gemara in Shvois. Why? Because the pasuk specifically says, the two men will get up and offer testimony. So we learn that an Isha will not say edus. Of course, certainly Eved, Eved, who typically cannot marry into the community, his marriage options are very limited. Of course, he's not qualified to offer testimony. Asks the Gemara, how can we compare Eved to Isha? Perhaps an Isha is more deficient than the Eved. Mali Isha shekein eina ru'uya lamila. An Isha, she does not relate to the mitzvah of Mila. Toimar be'Eved sheroy lamila, but an Eved has one up, has an advantage over the Isha, because he will experience Mila. Well, says the Gemara, Katan Yechiach. You can disprove that notion from the Katan, a boy below Bar Mitzvah. Sheyashna b'Mila, upasal edus. He cannot offer testimony despite the fact that he has Mila. Apparently, that's not a factor at play. Well, malakatan she'enu b'mitzvahs. You can't disprove anything from the katan because a katan has his own deficiency vis-a-vis the aid, vis-a-vis the Eved. An Eved, even Eved Kanani, we said before, has mitzvahs, right? At least a limited amount of mitzvahs, like a woman, as opposed to a katan who's totally potter from mitzvahs. Talking about Eved, right? Should be mitzvahs. So maybe he can be an aid as well. Well, Isha Techiach will disprove that notion from the Isha. Because despite the fact that she yeshna b'mitzvahs, she is obligated in some mitzvahs, psul edus, and cannot be an aid. So likewise the Eved. B'chazar adin. And this is sort of going to toss us back and forth. Because, you see, there are factors by the Isha that you can sort of attribute the psul of the edus, which don't apply to the Eved. And, there are factors by the Katan as well, which which can be sort of the reason to blame for his psul edus, which don't apply to the. So basically, we're sort of going back and forth, trying to find the sort of to pin the blame, find the reason, the cause for these individuals being disqualified from saying edus, and they're not similar. The Isha has one reason which doesn't apply to the Katan has a different reason which doesn't apply to the Isha. So you can't sort of attribute the halach of being disqualified for offering testimony to that reason. The reason over here doesn't apply to the other one, and likewise, vice versa. So apparently that's not the reason. What then? We have to find a common denominator, right? So what is common to both these sources, to Isha and to Katan? Hatzada shava sheben. What's the one thing in common? Shekein einan b'chol mitzvahs. Both the Isha and the Katan, they're not obligated in all mitzvahs. A Katan, no mitzvahs, and a Isha, only partial, right? So it's not a full comprehensive chiv mitzvahs. Upsul lahod. And likewise, they're pasul edus. So we'll use that as a formula. Afani avi esa eved. Likewise, we can derive and compare and apply this to the eved. She'enoi b'chol mitzvahs. Who likewise does not have full mitzvah obligations. At most, he's like an Isha. And likewise, with pasul lahod, he cannot be an aid. Pretty beautiful. Asks the Gemara, hold it. But if we're working with this concept of common denominators, we found something. We found a component relevant to Isha and to Katan and not to the Eved. So it's incomparable. Shekein einoi ish. Both the woman is not a man, and likewise the Katan. So, as Rashi explains, the pasuk by Edus specifically uses the word anoshim, right? V'amdu shnei ha'anoshim. So that explains why not an Isha and not a Katan. As opposed to an Eved, Taimar be'Eved, shuish, he's a man, he's an adult. So maybe he can be an aid. Says the Gemara, you're right. This is not really a fair source. Elotesi migazlon. We can derive the psul edus by the Eved from a robber who's pasul edus as well. Well, says the Gemara. First of all, says Rashi, how do we know that a gazlan is pasul edus? We have pasuk in Shmois Chav Gimel. Al tashes yodcha. Right? In Russia over there it says you cannot cooperate. Don't accept testimony from a Russia, from a robber, from a gazlan. Okay, so just as he's pasul, so perhaps the Eved as well. Whoa, what's the connection? Malak Gazlan, says the Gemara, how could you compare to a robber? Shekei massive garmaloi. He did something terribly wrong. He stole, he robbed. Of course he is pasul for edus. Telling about Eved shei massive garmaloi as opposed to an Eved, he did nothing wrong. We'll make a new equation. We'll put together Gazlan, and one of those, which one? One of those we mentioned before, whether it's the Isha or the Katan, and we'll say, look, Rashi presents the formula. The Tzad HaShava, the common denominator in this case, will be like this. What's common to the Gazlan, who's not really meticulous about keeping mitzvahs, right? Obviously, and let's say an Isha, right? She's also not going to do all the mitzvahs for a different reason, right? Totally different reason, but ultimately they do have something in common. They're not zohir b'chol mitzvah, says Rashi. They don't fulfill all the mitzvahs for different reasons. So just as their pasul edus, likewise an Eved. Says the Gemara, fine, that's one source. Here comes another source that an Eved will not be kosher to give edus. Mar b'red Ravina Amar. We have another pasuk, Amakro lo yumsu aves albanim. So this pasuk says like this: lo yumsu aves albanim, which, in a simple sense, means like this: Avos, fathers, a father cannot be punished on account of the testimony offered by his own son. So basically, a son cannot testify against his father in Bezdin. Ubanim lo yumsu aves. Likewise, a father cannot testify against his son in Bezdin. Ish b'cheta yumasu. That's it, right? We don't accept father against the son, son against the father. That's a simple meaning of the pasuk. Here comes a drasha. Lo yumsu aves albanim means like this. It teaches us that an eved who doesn't have the concept of lineage of yichus, right? The eved is like a bal chai, it's like your animal. There's no yichus there. His child doesn't really identify with him, etc. So lo yumsu alpi avos shehein lehem chayis banim. There's no misa applied in Bezdin. Basically, we don't accept any testimony in Bezdin from a person, from a father, who although physically has children, but halachically those children don't relate to him. Who's that type of person? An eved. She'ein lehem chayis banim. Their sons, their children don't relate to them, don't identify with them. So basically, an eved cannot offer testimony in Bezdin. That's the drasha behind this pasuk. Because if you insist that this pasuk is meant to be learned only literally, which is the simple meaning, fathers and sons cannot testify against each other. Nothing to do with an eved. Just a regular, lo yumsu aves albanim. You can never kill a father due to the edus of his own son. Be'edus banim, right? If that's all it means, the simple meaning of the pasuk, then the pasuk would phrase itself a bit differently than it did. The pasuk should say like this: Lo yumsu aves albanim. Aves can never be put to death al b'neim due to their children's testimony. Okay, simple halacha. My banim. It says lo yumsu aves al banim, some sort of general term on account of banim, not their children. Banim. Shema mina. Apparently, there's a deeper meaning here as well to disqualify the eved from offering testimony. You can never put a person to death. Basically, you can't accept testimony and edus from any person whose sons, whose offspring don't relate to him, i.e. an eved. Okay, so this first part of the pasuk has a double meaning. Simple meaning: Banim can never testify against their fathers. Deeper meaning: al banim. A person like an eved whose sons, whose children, whose offspring don't identify with him, halachically, these fellows can never be kosher as edim. Elamiyat. If that's the case, if that's how you learn part 1 of the pasuk, let's proceed to part B. Ubanim la yumsu alavis. Okay, so it's the other way around. Simple meaning, once again, means avos cannot testify against their children. They're not, a karev, a relative is not kosher ladies. But here as well, you're going to stretch it. That there's a deeper meaning as well. Here as well, you can never put a person to death. You can never accept any testimony from a person who has no chayis avos, who doesn't identify with his father. So what does that mean? Let's say a ger, right? His father is a guy. Halachically, he doesn't relate to his father. That's your classic case of banim she'ein lehem chayis avos. So you mean to say that any ger is puzzle for edus? That's a chiddush. We never heard that before. So, in line with the interpretation applying to part 1, if you apply the same interpretation to part B, you're going to have this untrue conclusion that a ger is puzzle edus. Amri, so the response was like this: no, you can't compare. Hachi hashta. How do you compare the two things? A ger to the eved. You see, a ger nihi de'en lechayis lamalo. True. He no longer identifies upwards, right, to his father, to his grandfather. But he has yichus, right, which means that his own offspring relate to him. Lafuki eved, as opposed to the eved, who's one alone. De'en lo yichayis lo lamalo lo lamata, who's totally disconnected. He doesn't relate upward to his parents and downwards to his offspring. So he's a totally different state. Says the Gemara, this agadaita ger pasal edus, because if it were so that we do interpret part B of the pasuk in a manner which disqualifies even a ger, if it were true, then the pasuk would phrase itself differently. First, it would teach us that a ger is pasal edus, and then we would know automatically, and of course, if a ger is pasal, certainly an eved is possible because he's totally disconnected from his family, right? So if that were so, Lichtav Rachman, the pasuk would say like this: L'yumsu avos al b'neim, l'kadam rinan. L'yumsu be'edus pan. Pasuk would begin L'yumsu avos al b'neim. You can never punish a father as a result of his children's testimony. Plain and simple halacha that a child can never testify against the father. Simple. And then, in part B of the pasuk, it would say like this. There, it would incorporate the halacha of the ger being possible. Ubanam l'yimsal avos, which means the shamas min atrei. It would say it like this: Ubanam l'yimsal avos. That both things we would learn from this. First of all, the simple meaning. Chada, number one, l'yimsal bana beidus avos, that a ben can never be punished resulting from his father's testimony, plain halacha, v'idach, and then the other deeper meaning, lo yumsu al pi banim sheinam chayis avos. You can never, listen and heed to any testimony offered by a son who doesn't identify with his father, basically a ger. So this portion of the pasuk would disqualify the ger, and once we know the ger is off, of course the eved. Because the eved has a double deficiency in both directions. He doesn't relate to his parents or his offspring. The eved nafkalei b'kavachomer ger, an eved will be learned from a kavachomer, from the ger. Oma ger, if even a ger of the lamal who ein lechayis, although he doesn't relate back up to his forefathers, avalamal ish lechayis, but does relate to his offspring. So despite the fact that it's only a limited disconnect, pasal edus, he cannot offer edus. Certainly the eved is totally disconnected. Upwards and downwards. Of course, of course he's disqualified. So basically, if the Torah is endeavoring to teach us that an eved and a ger are on the same boat, then discuss ger, and automatically by default we will know eved. Ella rather, since the pasuk began by saying lo yumsu avos al banim, which again has this sort of double meaning. Firstly, that a ben can never testify against his father, plain and simple, and also the mashma, which teaches us the deeper meaning as well. Lo yumsu al pi avos shein lechayis banim. The fact that it says al banim instead of al bneihem, we have that extra drasha as well, that you can never be maimis, you can never offer misas bezn, you can never act upon edus of a father who has no chayis banim, whose children, whose offspring don't relate to him. What does that teach us? That an eved is pasal edus. Mamino eved shein lechayis loy lamat, only an eved who's totally disconnected from his parents and from his children, who the pasal edus, he cannot offer edus. Because he has that double deficiency. Aval ger, but a ger who is connected to his offspring, even the yesh lechayis lamata, he has that yichus going down. Kosher le'edus is kosher for edus. So basically, the fact that the pasuk shows this type of expression, which includes the eved, that indicates to us that only the eved is disqualified, but not the ger, because otherwise the pasuk would only mention a lashon which incorporates the ger, the second part of the pasuk. Somebody who doesn't relate to his avos, such as a ger, is pasul. And once the ger is pasul, of course the eved. No. Torah began with a reference to the eved. What does that teach us? That only the eved is pasul because he's totally disconnected of a ger, but a ger is in. Even the yesh lechayis lamata kashaledis. Once he has that yichus, at least in one direction, going down to his offspring, his kashaledis. Asks the Gemara. Okay, so then why did the pasuk use similar phraseology in the second part as in the first part? It's unnecessary. Once we have learned in the first part that an eved is pasul but not a ger, so why the second part of the pasuk? Does it say "Banam layumsal avos"? We no longer have that, source for the ger, right? The ger is kosher. So the pasuk is just simply teaching us that, a simple halacha, banim cannot be put to death based on the father's testimony. A plain halacha that a father cannot say this against his son. So, and it should use simple language. Banim layumsu al aviseyim, right? Any father cannot be made against his son. If that's the story, if that's the case, that part B of the pasuk is not teaching us any more than just a simple meaning, simple halacha, that an av cannot say edus against his son. It should say it like that. So why does it say it differently? Which sort of sounds like it's relating to that broader explanation. The mashma, which sounds like you can never accept edus from a son who doesn't relate to his father, which almost sounds like a ger is pasul, but you're telling me a ger is kosher. Says well, you're right. Sometimes the pasuk will do that. We'll use sort of matching language. There's no reference to this halacha in this part of the pasuk. No, but rather I did the kasal yimsu avis albonim on account of the fact that the pasuk shows this presentation in part one of the pasuk yimsu avis albonim, rather than just saying simply yimsu avis albnehem. It says albonim to teach us that the eved is pasul because he's a father who has no yichus to his children, to his parents. Kasav nami ibonim leimsal avos. So on account of that, the pasuk used similar expressions and similar phraseology in part B, but of course, it's only alluding to the simple halacha that an av cannot say edus against the son. But in terms of the eved versus the ger, only the eved is out and the ger is in. So bottom line, what is the status of an eved knani in terms of boishes, achlekas? Rabbi Yehuda says you pay boishes for the boishes of an eved. Sorry, the Rabbanan say you do. Rabbi Yehuda says you do not. It's a question of how to learn the word achiv. Right, according to Rabbi Yehuda, it needs to be an achva that pertains to marriage, which doesn't apply to the eved. Rabbanan say achiv hu b'mitzvahs. There's that sort of identity of brothership when it comes to chiyuv of mitzvahs of the eved, so he's sort of in on that. When it comes to Edom Zaymimin, who plotted against the eved, well, all the halachas apply there as well. All types of evil are included in that. Regarding appointing him as a king, according to all shittas, he's not qualified. It's not mikerev achecha mimufchar shebachecha. And regarding an eved being kashal edus, which theoretically was a kasha, according to Rabbanon, consider him one of your brethren. So why not? We have either the Kavachimer there or the pasuk layumsu aves alpanim. Continues the Gemara. We have a story involving the mother of the Rav Shmuel bar Abba. So Rav Shmuel, the son of Abba, his mother did something like this. Imei Rav Shmuel bar Abba mihagrunya, from this town, Havas Nasiba. So his mother was married to Rav Abba, right? Rav Shmuel bar Abba's father. Havas Nasiba leil Rav Abba. Now apparently she had plenty of assets and she wanted to pass it on to her son. Typically a husband inherits his wife's assets after her passing, but she wanted to pass it on to her own son. So she wrote away her assets, Rav Shmuel bar Abba, to her son. Bra, right, her son. After she passed on, so the son of Shmuel bar Abba wanted to take possession. Also, Shmuel bar Abba, he went to who? Kamei Rabbi Yehuda bar Abba. Ukmei, and he showed him the document, and he got it. He took possession. Ukmei b'nichsis, Rabbi Yehuda bar Abba gave him access. He won the case. He took the nechasim. Father wasn't too happy. Azal Rabbi Abba, and he related the story, complained to a different chacham. Amra lemilsa, kamei to Rabbi Yehuda. Azal Rabbi Yehuda, Amra kamei to Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda went and passed on the story to Rabbi Yehuda. What's the halach in this case? Does the son have a right to the father? Amr Leis, Rabbi Yehuda says, no, it goes to the father. Hachi Amr Shmuel told us, Ha'ish Hashamachar b'nichsem malug. So nichsem malug are these possessions that technically belong to the married woman. So the actual land, let's say it's real estate, so the land itself belongs to her, but the husband has a right to the income that's generated throughout the marriage. That's the arrangement. So let's say the Isha sells these properties during her lifetime, during her marriage, during her husband's lifetime, Umeisa, and then she passes on. So she sold them, and then she passed on. Typically, if she would not have sold, husband gets it. But here as well, Habal moitzi medalakuches, the husband has a right to expropriate it, to extract it from these buyers. Why? Because the Chachamim established that a husband has a din of a lekiach rishon. Rashi says he's like the first buyer. He has first rights. So as soon as she passes away, he gets it. Okay, it's here as well. Let's connect it to our story as well. Sure, she gave it away to her kid, but the husband overrides that, and he gets it upon her passing. Okay, Gemara continues. So Shmuel seemed to disagree with Rav Yirmiyah bar Abba's conclusion. So they went back and they related this to Rav Yirmiyah. Amru kamed Rav Yirmiyah bar Abba. Look, Shmuel disagreed with your verdict. Amalu, he responded, look, I don't know, Anamas Nisi Yadan, I'm coming from a brisa. Some say it's a Geras Masnisin, it's a Mishnah. Listen to this Mishnah, which will prove me right. A father has a field, a property, and he gives it away, he grants it, he writes it off to his own son. So he says, look, after my passing, you'll take possession of this. There are other sons. I want to give it to you. This is yours after I pass away. Not now, but after I pass on. What's the status of this field until father passes away? Right? So let's sort of split let's divide into two. We have the guf and the peiros, the actual property, the guf, the actual field. Technically, it's sort of the sons, right? Father gave it to him. So the guf is the sons, he owns the actual field, but the peiros, anything that's income related, belongs to the father. He sort of retained that right, until he passes on. So the guf, son, peiros, father. Haben, so at this point, it's sort of in a state of limbo, right? Haben einu yachal limkar, so if the son turns around and decides to sell this field, he can't. It's not fully his. It's still the father's to a certain extent. And likewise, va'av einu yachal limkar, he can't either sell it because it's been granted to the kid. Macharav, father chooses yes to sell at this point. It's sold temporarily until he passes on. And then it reverts to the kid. He can sell the sort of the income rights, but the actual field belongs to the son. Macharaben, if the son chose to sell at this point, so the son's customer cannot enter the field until father passes on. But let's make a diak. This is Rav Yirmiyah speaking now. So we finished the Mishnah. Now, Kimai is Av, but let's say, right, son sold it, and then a year later father passed on. At that point, Mia still, right, certainly, is still a keach. the son's buyer will access the field. And we're assuming that this holds true. V'afagav demeis haben b'chayav. Let's go back. Reuven and Shimon. Reuven gave away his field to his son Shimon. Right? After my passing, it's yours. Shimon sold it to Levi. So in the meantime, Levi cannot access. Now Shimon, the son, passed away first. So he never actually took possession of the field. And then Reuven, the father, passed away. We're assuming, even in this type of case, Levi will take possession because he bought it from Shimon, the rightful owner, right? Even though Shimon died during his father's lifetime, in which case the field never reverted to his full ownership. He never actually, fully got it because the father still had the payroll, still had limited access. The son's guf ownership is sufficient to allow him to sell it. And whose shita are we following? Like that shita, the Amor says, it doesn't matter what happened, who died first, whether the son died first, in which case he never actually took possession of this full property. Because father was still, partially accessing the field. So either that case, or the father died first, in which case the son did take full possession. In both cases, kind of like kayach. Levi, the customer, will acquire the field. The itmam, because we have learned. Meaning, where do we see, this point from Rish Lakish? Because we learned like this. So the son sold a field during his father's lifetime, right? So Shimon sold the field to Levi. And Shimon, the son, died while Reuven, the father, was still alive. Question, does Levi get it or not? Levi does not get it. In a minute we'll see why. Rish Lakish Amar, he does. Why? Rabbi Yehuda Amar Levi doesn't get it. Amar Lach, because Rabbi Yehuda says like this. Kiktani masnisin. The halacha that we just learned in the Mishnah, which sounds otherwise, which sounds like Levi does get it. If the son, Shimon, sold it to Levi, Levi has to wait until Reuven dies, but at that point he does get it. Is still a keyach, but when the father, Reuven, dies, Levi does get it. That holds true only he delays habein b'chayav. Only if Shimon did not pass away during his father's lifetime. Rather, Reuven died first, in which case, also the aben. Shimon took possession, so that sort of reverts to Levi. He became a full owner. So it makes sense that he can sell it. But if it was in the reverse, but if Shimon died first, the ben, in which case Shimon never took full possession because Reuven, the father, was still a part owner. All along he was Kinyan Peres, right? Ki Mayis Av, so even if ultimately Reuven died, but if Shimon died first, he's out of it. Nami, less lekech, so if the father died, even if he died after, it doesn't matter, lekech doesn't get it. Why? Alma Kasavar. Apparently, Rabbi Yochanan holds Kinyan Peres. The limited, ownership expressed by the father, Kinyan Peres, is regarded like actual ownership of the actual property. And that is a barrier that blocks, that prevents the son from selling. So when Shimon sold the field, it wasn't a proper sale because father overrode that. So if ultimately father dies and son actually takes full possession, so now it reverts to his customer. But if that never happened, because Shimon died first, it never got to the point that Shimon fully acquired it. Father's Kinyan Peres is regarded as actual ownership. But even in this case, Levi, who is Shimon, the son's buyer, will get it. Because according to Rish Lakish, this halacha that we just learned in the Mishnah, that it reverts to Levi, the Machar Ben. If Shimon sold it, Levi will have to wait until Reuven dies. But But when Reuven ultimately does pass on, Levi gets it. Doesn't matter how. Doesn't matter what. Lo yishna lo meisa ben b'chayav. Whether Shimon did not ultimately die during Reuven's lifetime, in which case, Reuven died first, the other the ben, in which case the field reverted to Shimon's full ownership. Not only in that case do we say it gets transferred to Levi, but lo yishna, and likewise, it doesn't matter if Meisa ben mechayav. If Shimon was the one who died first, the lo yasel the other ben, in which case it never reverted to full ownership on account of Shimon. Levi gets it. Why? Alma kasava. Clearly, Rav Shlokish holds kinyan peiros laki kinyan gufdami. Father's limited ownership is not regarded as full ownership, and therefore mechika zavin dideka zavin. When Shimon sold, it was his field that was sold. So, irrespective of the order of events or the sequence of these, Levi gets it. Okay, so that's the sort of general presentation. We have this machlokes where Reb Shimon Lakish says kinyan perish lav ki kinyan guftami. So limited ownership is limited, right? That's it. We don't look at it as actual ownership. Now, v'anan hashta. Now let's take a look at our case, right? Hashta bein Rabbi Yirmiyah ba'Abba or bein Rabbi Yehuda, both of these shitas, Rabbi Yirmiyah ba'Abba and Rabbi Yehuda that we went through before. Apparently, they all hold Reb Shimon Lakish. Really, they hold like Reb Shimon Lakish, and Rashi explains because that's how we paskin. Now, halacha is that typically we paskin like Rish Lakish in this halacha. Rashi brings 3 cases that we paskin like Rish Lakish. One of which is this: kinyan aperis is not kinyan guf. So let's move on. So once we have that as an established fact, how does that pertain to our story with the mother and the father and the kid? The Ka'amar, Rabbi Yirmiyah. So Rabbi Yirmiyah was now basing it on this whole presentation. He says like this: If it were so that limited ownership, kinyan peris, is regarded like full ownership, ki mayis av umayis haben b'chayav. So in the case where we have a son who sold, and the son passed on during father's lifetime, so he never actually took full possession because father had the kinyan peris. And Rish Lakish says that it does go on to his customer. Amai islay lekeach. So why does the customer get it? Because zavin hai loved it. Because zavin. The fact is that when Shimon sold it, right? This fellow Shimon, when he sold it, loved it because zavin. He didn't sell his own field. It was really the father's. Oh, Allah shmami, no. So why is it that we say that it works? Apparently, kinyan peros lav ki kinyan gufdami. It's clear from the Mishnah, based on Rish Lakish's explanation, that father's limited ownership kinyan peros is not regarded as kinyan guf. Okay, so bottom line, in our case as well, a story with the mother who gave his stuff away to the kid. It belongs to him, despite the fact that father had kinyan peros. So what? That's not real ownership. And even though a husband is entitled to the peris income coming from his wife's assets, but that's a limited zechus. It's not a real kinyan. It's not a real ownership, and therefore, the isha can certainly give it away to her kid. And even if she passed away before the husband, right? That's the case. If she passed away before him, so she never really regained full possession of her field. The peris still pertain to her husband. Still, he's not really an owner, and it goes to the kid. So that was Rav Yirmiyah ba'Abba's presentation to support his opinion. Okay, who was the opposing view? Rav Yehuda, right? He was the one who said that the husband has full rights, right? He overrides it. So Hadro l'kamed Rav Yehuda. So the ones who heard this presentation from Rabbi Yirmiyah went and sort of related it back to Rabbi Yehuda. What do you say? What do you have to say about this argument? Amar lahu. So he responded like this: I'm not impressed. It happens to be that Shmuel already told me that you can't compare the two, the apples and oranges. You can't compare The story there to our case, the Mishnah Seinu to our case, with the right? Why? My time of why? Amar Rabbi Yosef, I'll tell you why. Listen to this. You can't prove anything from that story with the father and the son. You see, you're assuming that the father only sort of enabled the son to get the field after father's passing, right? So basically, it was a very limited gift. It was sort of only a potential gift, which only sort of gets to you. Father only giving it to him sort of as soon as he dies, right? Until then, it's sort of hovering, it's pending. It's not a full gift at this point. So the son never really got it, and then the question is, how could he sell it, right? Father still owns it, etc., right? Who says? Perhaps, the reason is a bit different. You see, the son was a potential heir regardless. He was going to get the field regardless upon his father's passing. So when father gives away his field to his own son, perhaps what he means to say is like this: I know you're going to get it later, that's no question. I want to give it to you now. I'm sort of giving it to you in full. If you want to sell it, you can sell it. So that explains why the son can sell it. It's a totally different case. Okay, let's see. Certainly if the case in the Mishnah, there would have been the other way around. Let's try to picture a similar case, but in reverse. Instead of father giving his field to his son, we have a son turning around and giving his own personal field to his father. He doesn't want his own, kids, whatever, together. He wants to give it to his father. Okay? And again, the point is, I'm giving it to you, upon my passing, it's going to be fully yours. In the meantime, I, the son, will still get the pires. And then we have the same story. The father sold it, right? And we would have the result would be that the lekeach, the customer, the father's customer, gets it, and Rish Lakish would come and add that point. That doesn't matter how sequence of events are irrelevant, whether son died first or father died first, doesn't matter. The lekeach, father's customer, gets it. So if that would be the case, theoretically, if that were to have been the case, that really is a solid proof to your point. So then, in fact, you can prove that the Kinyan Peres, that the son's limited access at this point, the Peres that he gets, it's not actual ownership. Lav, Kinyan Hagufdami, it's not regarded as full ownership. It does not interfere with father's ability to sell. That would be a solid proof, because son has Peres, father has potential guf, which only really kicks in after the son passes away. And there we say, well, once the son passes away, whether or not the father actually got it, because even if father passed away first, doesn't matter. Once the son passes away, it goes to the father's customer, despite the fact that the son had limited ownership, because limited ownership is worthless. So then you have a good raya that Kinyan Peres is nothing. Lav, Kikinyan Guftami. But now, in our case, it's a bit different. It's slightly different, perhaps. But in our case, we have the other way around. Father gave his property to his son. Maybe what he meant to do is to give it to him immediately, with the ability to sell it. Because in any case, son was going to be yerush the father. So what was the point of father giving it to him? Perhaps he was fully granting him access to the field, including the ability to sell it now. So perhaps that's the underlying reason for the whole halacha. That's a totally different case than the case of the mother with the son, where Rashi explains the son was not roi to be yerush the father, and therefore this whole rationale doesn't apply. The mother, and therefore this whole rationale doesn't apply. Amalei Abai says like this: no, you can't differentiate. Atu bra yoris abba. Abba la yoris bra? What are we basing this distinction on? You think only a son is Yerush a father is not Yerush a son? It works both ways, right? Father is Yerush a son. He doesn't have other, and a son is Yerush the father. So, we can't differentiate. In both cases, they're roy to be Yerush. So, apparently, why was the father giving his field to his son, who in any case is going to be Yerushim? Apparently, he was trying to make him the exclusive sole heir. I don't want it to go to my other sons. Right? So who says I wanted it to be effective immediately? I meant after my passing, I wanted to go to you, not to the other ones. I didn't mean anything more than that. I didn't mean to expand your ownership and give you access immediately. I'm still having Kinyan Paris. It's yours only after my passing. The reason why it was necessary to give it to him was so that only he gets it, not the other brothers. Sorry, the other way. Let's go back to the case where his son gave it to his father. A similar point, just the sequence of different. So when a son gives it to his father, apparently he had his own sons. He didn't want them to get it. Rather, he wanted his father to get it. So when he gives it to him, he just meant to say, look, I don't want my kids to get it after my passing. I want you to get it. But I didn't mean to say it's effective immediately, right? You'll get it later. But I want you, not my kids. To sort of get away, get an achasim. They ask it's away, he's coming to do it to get it away from his kids. It takes effect later. I don't want them to get it later, I want you to get it later. Right? So if the Mishnah would have presented the case that way, son giving to the father, I would interpret the halacha. I mean, why is the father as a customer? If the father turns around and sells this field that he just got from his son, why does the customer get it? Apparently because the Kinyan Paris, the limited access that the son still has during his lifetime, is not regarded as actual ownership. It doesn't interfere with the father's sale. Hachinami here as well. In our case, where father gave it to the kid, we can apply the same modus operandi, the same sort of the same rationale. The reason why the father decided to give it to his favorite child is to get it away from the other brothers of this child, basically from his other children. So that was his motive. He didn't mean more than that. He didn't mean to give it to him fully, immediately. This is yours upon my passing. But in the meantime, father still has limited access, Kinyan Paris. And still, what does the Mishnah say? If the son turns around and sells it, irrespective of what follows, whether the son was ever around to actually take possession or not, doesn't matter. So the lekech gets it. His customer takes possession. What do you mean? Father had access, he had Paris. Kinyan Paris is not real ownership. Okay? So that's the way to explain the Mishnah there. And likewise, let's compare it to the case of the story in our Gemara. Mother granted her field to her kid. It goes to him, despite the fact that husband had Paris. Okay, Ella Mai Eina Doima, the Mishnah Seinu. So the question is like this: why? What was the basis for Shmuel saying that these two cases are incomparable? It seems to be a good matchup, a good parallel. Answers the Gemara Meshum Takanas Ush'ah. Even though, generally speaking, Kinyan Paris is perhaps not Kinyan Aguf. Okay, but when it comes to husband, it's totally different. It was a special Takana established when the Sanhedrin was residing in the town of Usha that granted husband full rights, full access that overrides anything else. And Rashi says it's based on the concern of generating discontent and disharmony within the familial setting, Mishum Eva. So Chachamim granted the husband power to override his wife's sales. If any wife sells her nichse miluk during her husband's lifetime, and then she passes away, who gets it? Husband. His husband has the right to go extract it from these customers. Basically, he keeps it. So it's a totally different context. Husband and wife, totally different context. Special takana, and that explains why, according to Rabbi Yehuda, in this case, where the mother gave her stuff away to the kid, to her son of Shmuel bar Abba, the father, Rab Abba, was able to go and extract it and take possession. Okay, so that sort of summarizes Amud Beis, and once again in Amud Aleph we discuss the status of an Eved regarding Boishevs, Eidus, Edim Zaymimin, and being appointed as a king. Eved is Pasal Eidus, but a Ger, of course, is Kashal Eidus. Okay, so we're right in the middle of the sugi here with the episode of the mother's sale, Machlekes, and we concluded that, at least according to Rav Shmuel, Rabbi Yehuda quoted Shmuel, when it comes to a Baal, there's a special takana, that his koyach is stronger than the lokeach, and we'll continue on that discussion. Be'ez Hashem is Barach tomorrow. All the best to you and Hatzlacha Rabbah.